Hi everyone, welcome back to Race to the Top with me, Okielazu. In today's episode, we'll be talking to Dr. Paula Franklin about many things like growing up in Hackney, living and working on the beach in Barbados, the importance of resilience, and posing the question, what's the importance of humanity and caring in the medical profession today? I found it an enlightening conversation and feel enlightened as a result. I hope you do too. Let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Paula. How would you like to be referred to?
You can call me Paula, that would be great.
I don't have to say doctor all the time.
No.
Oh, okay, right.
That would upset me quite a lot.
Okay, Paula is great. I mean, just quickly, right? You worked in Barbados. I think that's like everybody's dream to work, to have a job that's in Barbados. One, why did you ever leave there? And what was it like?
It was amazing, actually. I went to Barbados because that's where my father was from.
All right, okay.
And there's a sort of long back history of why I ended up there, but I did end up there working in what they were newly developing a National Health Service.
All right.
And very similar to when the National Health Service started in the UK, they couldn't get local doctors to work in it.
All right.
So they recruited doctors from across the world, people from UK, from America, from other countries. And that's what I went there to do. But I ended up doing lots of other things as well. I was the GP for the army for a while.
Right.
I did some diving medicine because we had a hyperbaric chamber there. And it was my first exposure to private healthcare. So I did some private practice as a GP in Barbados. Yeah.
Yeah. What we actually wanted to hear was, hey, the beaches was amazing.
But they were. When I worked for the army, the office that I had was on the beach. So my view from the window was just beach and the Caribbean.
That's like a dream.
6 o'clock in the morning before the roll call.
Yeah.
And all of the soldiers would come to try and get out of the drill.
Oh, yeah.
She had a long line of people with complaints, and they're trying to say, I'm not well enough today, doc, to do it.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
And I could just hang out here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Barbados must have one of the biggest incidents of people phoning in sick.
Yeah. Well, in Barbados we call it liming.
Liming. Yeah. I'm liming, or I'm being a lime.
I'm liming.
I'm liming today. Yeah. I can believe it. So hey, great. I've got a mental picture of it, and it feels amazing.
It is. It was.
It feels amazing.
It was.
Okay, in which case, that takes us to the beginning, right? So we like to start at the beginning here on this podcast.
Okay.
So you grew up in Hackney, right?
I did. I was born in Hackney, yeah.
Born in Hackney. So can you tell me what it was like for you growing up in Hackney?
Well, the first thing I would say is the Hackney that I grew up in, we're talking the 1960s, was very different than the Hackney now.
I know.
And my parents, who were a mixed-race couple, and with all the challenges that brought, they married in 1950. And you just didn't see mixed-race couples at all.
Their experience must have been
horrendous.
Yeah.
But part of the reason they moved to Hackney, part of it was a job for my father, but it was also a very multicultural area.
Yes.
And so an area where they could be, to a large degree, accepted and live comfortably. And
how did they meet, out of interest? I mean, because you're right, they are the flag torch bearers for what is now a lot more much more common.
Yeah. It was like a romance novel.
Oh, really?
Doctor and nurse.
Oh, really?
In the hospital, yeah.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Yes, that's how they met.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. In Hackney? Oh, no, Hackney.
In London.
Okay.
In London, yeah. But then they moved to Hackney. My dad took he went to fill in a GP practice in Hackney and then stayed there, and he was there the rest of his life as a single-handed GP.
Oh, literally on his own?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in Hackney. You're born...
Very multicultural. Very, very. So, and I consider myself really lucky to have had that early experience. And I've got friends now who didn't grow up in that experience, and indeed my own children didn't grow up with that experience. So the fact that I had that, I feel really fortunate. So, people from, obviously lots of people from the West Indies, lots of people from Africa and Asia, Indian people, a large Jewish community, which you can imagine, and a lot of Holocaust survivors.
All right.
So I've got a strong memory around my parents talking about their experience of the war and the aftermath of the war. Even though it was before I was born, it was still very, very present. And I can't say it was a tolerant society. I don't think there is such a thing, but compared to what it could have been, it was an enjoyable childhood.
Probably back then, you probably didn't perceive how lucky you were to be in such an melting pot of people, right?
I had no idea. I didn't know. It wasn't actually until I was at medical school and a junior doctor that I realised how different the world was than my growing up. And one example I give is the school that I went to the local grammar school, and it was all girls, but from many different cultures, and we just got along together. You know, the Indian girls wore their trousers under their skirts because they weren't allowed to wear their legs. The Jewish girls went home early on Fridays.
Yeah.
We just did it. No one complained.
Yeah.
No one said, oh, my gosh, that's not fair, or, you know, I have a right to go home early on Friday if they have a right. It was just a much more tolerant, understanding environment. And that's... So I don't know. I feel lucky to have had that. It'd be interesting for us to talk about how well or not that prepared me for the future. But that's how I grew up.
Well, how did it? So what do you think you learned living... I mean, basically, we've discussed this before, but I'm from Balham, South London, and it's very similar, right? It's probably the South London version of Hackney with North London. And everyone was so different that everything was different. I mean, there was no normal. There was no 80 or 90% of the people in this area like this, because they just didn't exist.
Absolutely.
It was exactly as you said, a melting pot. And so you just you learn to accept everyone for being themselves, right?
I agree, and I think it's sad to think when I look back now, and I hadn't really thought about it till now, but I've never lived in that environment since.
Yeah, me neither.
Never have.
You know, and in fact, the better you do, the more further away that becomes almost.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I remember listening to Levi Root saying he now lives in Surrey. You know, like he's from Brixton and now he lives in Surrey. He's done so well. He can now he doesn't live with the people he grew up with.
Absolutely.
He lives with people completely different to him, which is kind of a weird thing.
But as you were saying, if you go back to Hackney now, it isn't like that
now.
So you've got to think, well, where do you find that now? Where does that exist now?
Yeah. I mean, do you go back to Hackney much?
I haven't been for a while, but I don't have any... You know, my father died and my mother died before that. In some ways, I'm almost nervous to go back.
All right.
Because I think I'm going to be disappointed.
Disappointed?
Because the memories I have of Hackney, of growing up in Hackney, are so strong and so good.
Yeah.
And I don't think that... I think it'll be a very different place now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know that to be true. I know that to be true. When I go back to Balham, it's like a gentrified place that I don't recognise.
Exactly.
You know, which I'm happy for in some ways.
Yeah, but I treasure my memories of how it was.
Yeah, you know? And I suppose, and we should, right?
Yeah.
You know, because those are memories that can't be taken away. So tell me about school. What was that like?
School was great. I mean, I walked to my primary school.
Right.
And I went to the local grammar school, which was a couple of buses, and went on the bus, and it was fine. Very mixed, as I've described. Yeah. Interestingly, you know what's really interesting, though, now I think about it? Very mixed in terms of the pupils. Yes. Much less so in terms of the teachers.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I'm struggling now to think of many teachers that were not white at that point in time. I'm not saying that there weren't any, but they're not springing to mind. No, I enjoyed school. It was fun, and it was, happy times.
And is it fair to assume that because it was so multicultural, being a person of colour was less of an issue in school because everybody was different?
I didn't perceive it to be an issue in school at all. And to be honest with you, when I was very small, and I was sort of in infants and junior school, I didn't perceive it to be an issue at all.
Yeah.
I think my world was quite small.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to Kensington. I was living in Hackney, and I wasn't venturing out anywhere. But I had the great advantage, also in retrospect, of my father being the local GP.
Yes, of course.
You know, and GPs, I have a huge amount of respect for GPs because I was one for a short time, but I lived with him and his life, and I have a huge amount of respect for them. But a GP in those days was absolutely woven into the community.
Yeah.
You know, he had patients who he had delivered their parents, you know, generations of. He knew everybody. They all knew him. He knew all their illnesses, all their medical histories. There's a whole lot of flaws with that kind of system. I understand that. But for me, as a child, as his child, growing up in that community, that was almost like an extra layer of protection.
Yeah, and I get it. You know?
If they're ever going to pick on anybody, any black person, it probably wasn't going to be me.
Yes, yeah.
So I was lucky in that too.
People know because if they get an ailment, they're going to be going to...
I was Dr. Franklin's daughter, right? So they're not going to mess with me. So, yeah.
I think it's really interesting. My sister-in-law lives in Australia, and her father-in-law is the local doctor.
Yeah.
And in that community, it's very much...
Absolutely.
Woven into the community still.
Yeah.
You know, to the point where, I don't know, you know, if you get stopped by the police, they're like,
exactly.
Dr. Newman.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
you know.
And at the time, I don't think I appreciated it. Now, looking back, I realise how fortunate I was.
Yeah, you know, which is, I mean, you know, part of what we talk about is privilege, and that's a privilege that,
absolutely.
You would have had, even though, you know, being probably one of the only mixed race people, because there wasn't a thing back then.
No, there are plenty of black children, black girls, and plenty of Asian girls and Jewish girls and Indian girls, but no, very, very few.
Yeah. Was there ever I'm stuck in no man's land here, or was that just not a thing?
No, it wasn't a thing. Not when I was that age. I think because, like you've said, there was no normal.
Yeah.
You know, I was just another different person amongst all the other different people.
Yeah, you know, and actually, if you look at skin tone, you could have been.
You can't tell.
It's just like a gradient between white and black, and and when you're in Hackney or Ballymore, and you've got every gradient in between.
Exactly.
You're just like
You're just somewhere on the spectrum.
Yeah, you're just somewhere on the spectrum. You know, and it kind of works, which is cool. I mean, your dad's a doctor.
Yeah.
Were you always going to be a doctor?
Do you know what? I really didn't want to be.
Right.
And I tried to think of everything else that I could possibly do, and then, of course, inevitably ended up doing it. No, I didn't. I can't say I had a huge vocation and a huge passion for it. I liked,
Very honest.
I didn't. I like science.
Right.
I like people. I was quite clear about what I didn't want to do when I was sort of doing A-levels and thinking about it. I didn't want to work in a laboratory or do anything like that. But I wasn't drawn to sort of healing people and all that kind of thing. And maybe it's because I did grow up in the thick of it.
Yes.
You know, my mum was a nurse, my dad was a doctor. His surgery was in our garden. We were surrounded all the time by patients coming to the door and back and forth, and you know, it was interwoven in our lives. It wasn't. He didn't go away to work and come home. It was in our house. It was around us all the time.
Oh, fascinating.
And so there was no. There was no sort of romance about being a doctor. There was no. It was. I never saw him. Yeah. You know, he had Thursday afternoons off, and that's when I got to see him. Yeah. Because he worked so hard.
Yeah.
So it wasn't aspirational to me at that point. So no, I wasn't. My parents were most keen that I would have a profession.
Right.
And they didn't really mind what it was. I could have been an accountant, a dentist, doctor, lawyer, whatever. And I think that was rooted. It's actually a lot of people I speak to now, I think it's very rooted in the sort of people of colour, in that history.
Yes.
And extremely rooted in my parents because of their experience being together. The idea that you had to have some qualification, some piece of paper, if you like, something that no one could take away from you. Whatever they can say to you, you can say, actually, I'm a lawyer.
Yeah.
You know, you might think I'm a piece of shit on the bottom. Sorry, I'm
on
the bottom of your shoe.
You're all right.
But you know, I've got this, and I can do this, and it's and I think partly it's about self-worth and self-esteem, but also it's partly about your place in the world.
Yeah, and I've often thought about this because my mum, bless her soul, she always wanted me to be a doctor. She'd be amazed if she was watching. She'd be like, "Why couldn't you have been like Paula? Why could you look at you doing this thing from across thing, and you could have been a doctor as well. See what you should have done, you know." And in fact, I almost ended up going to medical school, not because I wanted to go to medical school, because my mum, especially my dad too, but my mum was just so desperate for me to be a doctor, you know. And I think it's almost a cultural thing. Yeah, you know, so I'm an accountant. She's like, accountant's okay. Right, but you know, lawyer was like, well, actually, I think priest would have been, would have trumped everything. And then doctor, lawyer, accountant, it's kind of acceptable. But you know, I never really thought about that being a sort of qualification.
Oh yeah.
That obviously I know it's a qualification, but I never thought about it as a thing that someone can't take away. Especially if you're a person of colour, they can say, you can say what you like about me, but here's a certificate that says I'm valuable.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, my parents literally used those words with me, something that no one can take away from you, you know. And as I say, they wouldn't have minded what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the most important thing. But I ended up doing medicine.
Is that the thing, you know, we talk about it and what you might tell your kids or people tell young people. Was that the thing that they said? That wasn't, you know, we talk about this sort of, you need to work harder, you need to work twice as hard. Did you get any of that? Or this is a nice thing, just have something that people can't take away from you?
Yeah, no, I didn't get any of the sort of work harder thing, but I did get have some sort of qualification, have some sort of profession, you know. So I guess it's the thing that you can work.
Yeah.
You're not waiting for someone in an you know, a managing director or someone to give you a job. If you've got a trade, a profession, you can practice law, counselling, whatever. You can work.
Yeah.
And I think that was a strong feeling, probably, as I say, also in part because of their own personal experience.
Yeah. No, I think that's super interesting. And actually, this days it can be any sort of trade, right? If you're a plumber or electrician, or it's a thing that you do.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely.
It's a trade. It's a skill. Yeah. And you can work.
Absolutely.
And almost work anywhere.
Absolutely. And make a lot of money.
Yeah, make a lot of money. If you can do electrician, you can do electrician pretty much anywhere in the world, right? And make a lot of money. So
completely.
Yeah. Is that the thing that your parents taught you or said to you that you value the most?
No, I don't think so. I think what I value most is not what they said, but how they lived their lives.
Okay.
I think both of my parents, in different ways, were all about people, all about caring for people, all about humanity, and you need to be understanding, you need to be generous, you need to be caring, you know, you need to treat people as you'd like to be treated yourself. That was how they lived their lives, really. They did it differently, but that's how they did it. And that's the strongest thing I think I've got from them, that you know, the most important thing is to care about things, about people, about everything, really. You know, if you do things with care, then you usually do the right things, and you usually do them well.
And how did that? So if you picked that up did you pick that up from early age, or are you sort of thinking, now I think back, that's what they gave me, or were you thinking when you were a young kid, actually, I'm picking this whole thing about being?
No, I don't think you pick it up when you're that age. I think it's by osmosis, isn't it? You just see it, and so you absorb it. You absorb a way of being in the world, and a way of living, and a way of treating other people, a way of reacting and responding to other people.
Yeah.
I think that's what I absorbed. I don't think there was anything explicit about that, and I don't think I knew it at the time.
Yeah. So were there any character traits that you showed as a child that have been important to you in your general career and your general journey?
Character traits.
Yeah, because, you know, some people say, you know, I was bossy, or I was organised, or I could see that thing early on, and it's kind of been with me the whole time.
Gosh, I suppose, I don't know if it's a character trait, but I think the thing I always had, and that stayed with me, and not always did me a service, I think sometimes not a great thing, and I've tried to shrug off, is this idea of the pressure to do well. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it ever really, well, did it come from my parents? Maybe.
You created it on yourself, or you had a sense of?
I think it's both.
Right.
Because I think my parents wanted me to do well, but I think I wanted to do well to please them in return. And this idea of being good at things and being and working at things. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you're not great at something first time, well, that's fair enough. Keep at it, you know, keep going. Keep learning, keep at it, keep trying. You know, don't give up at the first hurdle. Persevere. Yeah.
Then these days they call that growth mindset.
Oh, do they?
Yeah,
okay.
The term for that is growth mindset. Okay. It's this ability to know you're not going to be good at the start and keep going. And I always say, kids say to me, I can't do that. I say, you can't do it yet.
But don't you find a lot of young people are like that now?
More.
Yeah, have a go at something and they can't do. Oh well, I don't want to do that anymore. Then we've only done it once.
I know, and actually, what the biggest determinant I think or Adam Grant said, is this growth mindset to how successful a child will be.
Yeah.
Their ability to say, I'm not very good at it now, but I'm just going to keep going.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And I'm going to, if not master it, I'm going to keep doing it till I get better.
Yeah.
Rather than, I'm no good, just stop.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like that's what, without giving it a title or a name or anything that your parents
I think that's true.
gave you, which I think is key and really important. So that's you growing up. Mm-hmm. You leave. Oh, actually, let me talk a little bit about the transition to medical school, because you're probably now moving to an environment that is no way near as multicultural as you had become used to. Yeah, I got this little sense, this little feeling.
Oh gosh!
You must have gone to medical school.
I was
on the
unprepared.
You really? In what way?
I was unprepared in every way. I think. I went to medical school. I started medical school in 1978. Right. Okay, so that gives us a sort of time stamp on that. And I was unprepared, first of all, because I wasn't confident in my own ability. Okay. I thought I was going to be the most stupid person there.
What made you think that?
I think I hadn't done particularly well in my A levels.
Did well enough though.
Well enough, but I wasn't. I don't know. What did I think? I just thought everyone else was going to be cleverer than me. I thought everyone else was going to be, sharper than me. And I hadn't really, it sounds ridiculous maybe in retrospect, I don't know, but I hadn't really thought about anything to do with race at that point.
Yeah. Well,
really
why would you? Because you grow up in this multi-ethnic
Absolutely.
thing.
But I turned up, and of course I think there were 2 African people in the class. Right. It was a class of 100, 120, a man and a woman, 1 Indian woman in the class, and myself.
That was it? Mm. Wow. Did you notice that straight away? Was that like, woo?
Yeah, it was okay. But the other, probably equally impactful thing was the class difference.
Ah, yes.
So I grew up in Hackney. We're a working class community, right? And these people spoke differently. Yeah. They had a confidence that I had never seen. Yeah. Because I think probably, I don't know the figures, Oki, and I'm aware someone might listen to this and might say, oh gosh, Paula, you're completely wrong. But a lot of them, majority of them will have gone to private schools. Yep.
In 78, for sure.
And they spoke differently. They had different experience. They had different, not cultural experience, but life experience. Where they'd been and what they'd done. And, even things like concerts they'd been to, they talked freely about this opera or that, whatever. Well,
Yeah, different world.
My father actually loved opera, but I hadn't been to one.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was like stepping into a different world. And
what impact did that have, do you think? Or was that something you got used to very quickly?
I think at the time I was most aware of wanting to forge some friendships, which actually wasn't hard. Yeah. A lot of the people were very nice, and that wasn't hard. And I was very aware, as I say, of thinking, gosh, I'm not clever enough to be here. And I was very aware of thinking, actually, I need to make sure I can stay here and do well enough to be here. But I think in some aspects, it opened my eyes to things. And in other aspects, it made me shrink a bit. Yeah. To think, well, actually, I don't know how to engage with some of these people. I don't know. I can't be in that conversation. Yeah. I have no frame of reference for that conversation at all. So I think it's a bit of both, which is weird. I think the thing to remember about medicine, though, it's different from many other university courses because you're all in it together all the time, and you're also all only together. My 2 daughters have done other kinds of degrees, and they mix with different faculties. And medicine's not like that. It's you're in it, and so you do reasonably quickly form a community.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there are different bits of that community, but you do pretty quickly because it's hard.
Yeah.
And against the adversity, and people are failing things left, right and centre and redoing things and struggling with things and helping each other. So you do fairly quickly form that community. But it was an awakening for me to think, this is a world that I have not known.
So one of the things that, in trying to create more leaders of colour, we talk about them going into an environment that won't be like, if you grew up in Hackney, it won't be multiracial. Let's all be honest. It's not going to be like that. And so we talk about arriving, surviving, and thriving. Obviously, to thrive, you have to survive. What was it the community that was the key to you staying the course? Because lots of people don't stay the course; they just don't make it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've got friends that I have to this day from those years, and we had our 40-year reunion, medical school reunion, the end of last year, which I went to. So I've got friends to this day from that time. So it's firm friendships because of how you're living and how you're working. You can't recreate that environment again. So I think it's mostly that.
Yeah. It's what I call it scaffolding, which is people support you. You create a scaffold that allows you to survive.
I think the other thing, though, which is despite me not really having wanted to be a doctor, once you get there, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so it's not. I was completely interested in it and wanting to learn it and wanting to understand it. So that also helps. I think you keep going. If it had been really boring then I probably wouldn't have stayed the course.
No, I can only imagine that it is that. So because you said you went into it not really wanting to do it, so and then you went to an environment where people didn't look like
exactly
you or sound like you, but you still made it through, and it must have been due to something, which is what you're saying. I think it's really important that people find ways to support themselves to get through environments that aren't necessarily built for them.
I think you're right, and I think it is essential. And I don't know how you do that. We can talk about how you do that, but we need to give our young people some sort. I feel like it's almost like a steel core. They've got to have something solid inside them that helps them withstand the winds and the buffers that are going to come, because they're going to come.
Yeah.
And you'll feel alone, and you'll feel left out, and you'll feel inadequate, and you'll feel like you're never going to make it, and you'll feel like everyone's doing well and you're not. But there has to be something. We have to help them have some core that gives them a resilience to keep going in those situations.
Yeah, the word comes up so often, the resilience thing. You've really got to be able to bounce back.
You have to.
From disappointment.
And from things that are appalling. And I suppose some of that, going back to my parents, got from my parents, but some horrible things will happen to you. People will say horrible things. People will do unpleasant things. And you can lay down and be defeated by it, or you can get up again and fight again. Yeah,
I sometimes wonder if being a person of colour equips you for that, because bad stuff is probably going to happen to you. I've met many people of colour who haven't had some sort of racist incident or other, but you have to get through it, right? You've got to move through and keep one foot in front of the other and keep going.
Yeah, you do.
And I suppose, if we preach that resilience and keep pushing rather than back off, that would be a key thing, right?
I agree. I think you have to. Yeah.
I think it's
because giving up is letting them win.
Yes.
And I will not do.
Yeah. Hallelujah. Cool. So you go, you train, you get through, you survive and thrive at medical school. I assume thrive, but you can correct me if you're wrong. I got through. Yeah, you got through.
I had a lot of fun. I mean, but I don't want it to sound like it was like some kind of torture. I had great fun. It was a great time.
But anyone who gets to be a doctor has thrived, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. It's 7 years. It's my two nephews have just done it. It feels like they've been doing it for a long time.
It's a long journey. Yeah, it is.
A long time. But I think they're junior doctors. They're not definitely through. Yeah. But they've done.
Being a junior doctor is its own kind of hell.
Yeah, I know. Well, I've seen that. What was that show? This Might Hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, you watch that thing. Why would anyone want to ever be a doctor? We kind of need them. And I remember reading through your thing, because correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like you pretty quickly went into being a doctor but not a doctor.
Oh, absolutely.
In a
Absolutely.
thing. So my question was, were you ever a proper doctor?
Yeah. No, I was, but not for very long.
Yes.
Is the honest truth. So I started out thinking that I wanted to be a physician. I wanted to be a hospital consultant, and I'd done well in my medicine when I was studying, and I thought I was going to do that. It was hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Right? It's just hard. But also my mother was ill at that time. She had dementia, which I think was an additional challenge. And I was in a job, obviously working in the NHS. I was in a job that I actually hated.
All right. Okay.
And this is when I went to Barbados, and I was really, really fed up. And
before Barbados, or
it's
what?
before Barbados.
Okay.
And my father, I think he was thinking, "Gosh, she's gonna throw the towel in here," because it was, the combination of the home challenges, my mother, the job that I really didn't like, but you're still working like 100 hours a week at something you're not enjoying. When I say you're not enjoying, let me maybe explain that a bit more. This is the NHS, and we're talking now the mid-1980s, right?
Yeah.
So we're going back a while. But I was in a job where I had a huge amount of responsibility that actually I was not experienced enough to hold. I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
I felt that I didn't have enough senior support as a junior doctor, and therefore I felt I was concerned all the time about how well my patients, what kind of care they're getting, because they've got me, right? And,
I don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly. So the combination of that, and also the idea that, medicine's an apprenticeship. You learn on the job. You learn from your seniors telling you, the thing in medicine is you see one, do one, teach one, right?
Yeah.
So, and I didn't have that senior presence around me, and that's why I hated it. I wanted to get that across. It's not that I wasn't just having a stroke.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was that, and I think, as I say, my father, I think, thought, oh gosh, she's not going to make it.
She's not going to make it.
And the Barbados government had contacted him, obviously, as part of the diaspora, saying to him, do you want to come back? And he's saying, well, no, I don't want to come back, but she might want to come. So he said to me, why don't you do this? He said, you've never worked abroad. You've never really been abroad. He said, rather than leave medicine, go and do this. Be a doctor somewhere else. See what it's like. Try a different experience. Try a different environment, a different world. And so I went to Barbados, and I've also practiced medicine in Barbados. And it was after I left Barbados and went to America that I stopped practicing, and I haven't practiced since. So probably I was about 6 or 8 years practicing, and that's all.
Yeah, which is short, relative for most.
Very short.
For most doctors.
Very
you
short.
were practicing as a doctor in US as well?
No. When I went to the US to study public health.
Oh.
Because what interested me most, remember, I'm now the girl years ago that didn't really have any passion to be a doctor.
Yes, that's right.
Well, what interested me most, particularly when I was in Barbados, because they were setting up this National Health Service, was how do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you design a National Health Service? How do you decide what services are going to be where? How do you decide who's going to deliver them? How do you decide how it's going to be funded? Are patients going to pay anything or nothing? How are you going to pay your doctors? What doctors do you want? Where are you going to... And I was just fascinated by this whole thing that was happening around me. I was just practicing as a GP in the clinic.
Yeah.
But I could see this emerging around me, and I was fascinated by it. And that's how I ended up studying public health medicine in America, and that's how I moved out of practicing into sort of healthcare management and administration, I guess.
And I suppose what people don't understand, and I only got to understand from working at Bupa and since, is that health is not about you're sick when you go to the doctor, right? What public health is about, how all the incredible things you can do to stop people getting sick.
Exactly.
Which has got to be more investment in that. Than they're already sick, right?
Exactly. And it's the best place to put your money.
Yeah.
Best for, economically it's best, right? Because you stop all the expensive things you had to pay for. From a human point of view, it's best because you stop people having the suffering. The unfortunate thing, of course, is people do get ill, so you still got to pay for that. So you've got to figure out how to do that balance.
But less of them will get ill if we spend more money on public health.
But one of the tricky things, though, is if you're spending 99% of your budget on trying to make people better, and you're still not doing enough. Yeah. Because you still got people who are not getting the treatment they need when they need it, whatever. To say, well, actually, I'm not going to spend 99%, I'm going to spend 70%. So even more people are not going to get what they need. Yeah. But I'm going to take that money and do prevention. That's a really difficult a difficult manoeuvre to make.
And sidebar, but public health, race, US, UK,
Ooh,
right?
Oh, yes.
Let's do that for a little.
Okay.
Let's just do that quickly, because I'm really, really intrigued as someone who's worked in public health there and effectively here. As a person of colour, we're here to talk about race. What are your perspectives?
Oh gosh, it was eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
So I mean, I keep saying this, but these are experiences, right?
Yeah.
Life experiences, and I eventually lived 6 years in America.
Okay.
And as you say, I've worked all over the world. I've travelled all over the world: South Africa, Asia, everywhere. I will say, this will be horrific to many people, but America's the most racist society I've ever lived in, and I've ever been to and ever worked in.
And how do you define that?
How I felt when I was there, and how societies are constructed, how business is conducted, how people are treated, how decisions are made. It's so deeply rooted. And I married an African American.
Right.
And it's so deeply rooted in their history, in their being, in themselves, in a way that is different than in other places I've been, and certainly different from here. Certainly different. But no, when I went to America to study public health, we studied things that I'd never heard of, and jaw-dropping, this Tuskegee experiment, the syphilis experiment they did, this went on for generations, where they, this Tuskegee airmen, these were black airmen, fighters, pilots and fighters, that they gave syphilis to so they could watch and study and see what happened to them over generations, not treating them.
Really?
Oh, gosh, yeah. So those kinds of examples of things that were done in the name of experimental, experiments, health experiments. Let's have a look and understand, how does this disease develop and evolve in a population? Wow. Completely unethical.
Yeah. Inhumane.
Absolutely. It's one example, but I was amazed at that. And then you do a lot of epidemiology and demography, where you're looking at patterns of disease and illness in different environments, including different races, and in different socioeconomic status. And you have to be so careful when you use information and data. And I think we as societies generally are very careless with how we do it. But, the roots of most of these problems are not racial, they're socioeconomic.
Yes.
What happens is, the consequence is that people of certain heritage end up in that socioeconomic group.
Yeah.
And so people will say, actually, that's a black problem. It's not. It's a poor problem.
Yes.
It's just that 90% of the people in this environment who are poor happen to be black.
Yes.
And that's a different problem, you know. And it was studying public health in America that woke me up to a lot of those issues.
Yeah, the segregation is quite, I'm not saying it's apartheid, but when I went and studied a bit in the States, I couldn't believe the levels of segregation there are between blacks and whites. Yeah. It's almost unspoken about, but it's real.
It's real, and I have to say, it's also in part self-imposed. I was married to a black American, and most of his friends were black.
Yeah.
And that's what he liked. And I got a lot of sympathy with this. I can't criticise him for that, because he grew up in an environment where his teachers told him he would never be bright enough to study with white children. You can't, how you pick those messages that come repeatedly when you're a child.
Yeah. How
you pick those out of your brain and pull yourself up to, it's tough.
Yes, we could do the whole podcast on it. It's an incredible place. And part of the reason I mentioned it...
And I love America. I've been to America many times, and I love it and I enjoy it. I have to say, though, honestly, Oki, I would not choose to live there again.
No, I kind of get that. And actually, in the UK, we have our own challenges.
We certainly do.
But they are very, very different.
They are different.
There isn't that level of imposed or self-imposed segregation.
Institutional, endemic, institutional, issues.
And even though there was slavery in the UK, it's not as ingrained as it is.
And not at the same scale, and not with the same consequences.
Yeah.
And I agree.
You can talk about the Windrush generation, but that's different. That's people coming to work rather than people being dragged to be slaves.
And huge challenges there too, but different ones. I agree.
Very different challenges. Okay, that's super.
We've gone off on a tangent now, haven't we?
I just, when you were talking about public health, I thought, hang on, I've got to go. I think I've got to go there.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about resilience and stuff, and when I think about your career and what you've done, it's super interesting. Any significant setbacks? Because I like to talk about that because that often setbacks are what makes a person. So through your career, did you have any significant setbacks?
I think the biggest setback I had was when I was in America, between finishing my public health, I did a degree in public health there, and getting a job. Mm-hmm. And I was unemployed for a number of months then, and that was a really hard time. And therefore, I have a huge sympathy for people who are unemployed and struggling or trying to find work in whatever circumstances. But that was a difficult time for me, and I learned a lot from that experience that I think has made me a more empathetic person. Yeah. Because anybody can be unemployed at any point in time.
Yeah.
In the way people say, you could be homeless. You don't know what's going to necessarily happen to you. And here was I, there was 2 degrees at that point.
All right.
And couldn't find a job, essentially. Mostly because people didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
People didn't understand the fact that I was a doctor and I didn't want to practice medicine.
Yeah.
They just couldn't get that at all. And so then what do you do with someone like that? What job do you give someone like that? But yeah, I think that's probably my most significant sort of career sort of marker, I guess.
And in fact, are there lots of roles? Obviously, we met when you worked at Bupa as, I think when you met, you were deputy medical officer back then. There probably aren't. Are there lots of jobs for doctors using their skill that's not practice?
There's certainly many more now. Right. Than there were then. So remember back in the 1980s then, and it was, I think there's a couple of things. I think there are many more jobs now. I think there's also more of an understanding that you might choose not to see patients.
Yes.
Back then it was like, what the hell? You did all those years.
Yeah.
You went through all that hell, and now you're just not gonna use it.
Yeah.
A real non-understanding of that at all. But I think we do get that now. We do get that medicine and in fact all clinical training and clinical professions, nurses, physiotherapists, whatever, it gives you a set of skills that are very diverse and can apply to many different situations, many different roles. I talk a lot I do a fair bit of mentoring and so on about particularly young clinicians, not doctors, but nurses and, as I say, physios, speech therapists, whatever. And they say, well, I can't do anything else. I say, you can do a lot of things. All of the skills that make you a good nurse mean you could be a superb office manager or whatever it is you want to be, And I think we're more alive to that now than we perhaps were then.
And you've seen both sides. Many doctors would never know what it's like to work in an office.
No, haven't got a clue. And that's a big deal if they apply for a job like that. I mean, obviously I worked at Bupa for years. Yeah. And that's a really important thing when you're recruiting someone to help them understand what that environment's going to be like.
It's completely different.
Completely different. Completely different.
The skill set, the environment, it's almost, when you see people, we used to have it when I was at many places with vet nurses who are coming to work and, they're like, what is this? It's like, this is like a totally foreign to them. It's like almost like a different country. Mm-hmm. But the skills are still the same, but they're applied in a slightly different way.
It's totally foreign and a really difficult transition because what they have is a confidence in their competence and their capability. I know how to do this.
Yes.
I know how to be a dentist. I know how to be a nurse. I know how to be whatever it is. And then you come into an environment where all of that stuff doesn't apply. Yeah, you might know how to be a nurse, but, this isn't being a nurse as you have done in the past.
Yeah. And through all of this, we talked about American stuff. So, you start in a very, very mixed environment, then you go to a very non-mixed environment race-wise, then you're dotting around all around the world. Has race, or do you believe race has ever been an issue in your career?
Oh, I'm certain it has. I'm certain it has both for good and bad.
Right, okay.
I think that probably the times when it's been for ill, I might not have been aware of.
Yes.
It'd be, I have not been chosen for a job. I have not been shortlisted. I've not been selected. for a job or a project or a promotion or whatever. But quite often you don't see that.
No.
It's clouded in other reasons and other whatever. But I think in some circumstances, it's been a positive thing where there's an assumption that you can relate to people in a different way. So the example I will give you is when I worked for a while for Murray Stopes International, and I worked in, we did many visits to the developing world in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia.
Yeah.
And people of colour, looking at other people of colour, feel an affinity.
Yes.
Maybe that's not a politically correct thing for me to say, okay? But I think it's a fact.
I wouldn't know if it was or wasn't, but it's true.
And so I think there's an advantage then for me as an English doctor going into a village in Kenya and talking to them or encouraging them to take advantage of health. I began steps ahead in that relationship than I would have done had I not been the colour I am. Yeah,
and that's anything that can help people connect.
Absolutely.
For healing.
Absolutely.
And that's got to be a good thing. And those things, going back to the ones you didn't get, you don't know when they are. And that's almost the power of institutional racism, because
it is.
You kind of suspect it exists, but you don't know if it exists or not.
You don't know. And if you ask, you're never going to be told.
No.
So there's no point in that.
And if you ask, the person telling you, they don't even know.
That's true too.
They can't tell you that, actually, because they didn't actually know that's why it was. And that's the thing that sort of I rail against the most, which is I think we've got to do something about that, because people sometimes think that they don't even know they're doing.
I know. The ignorance, I think, is huge.
Yes.
I can remember quite a few years ago now, I was on a recruitment panel for, it was not a medical role, but I was on the panel because I worked in the organisation, and a young black guy came in. And he just wasn't right for the job. He just didn't have quite enough experience and skill. And so he wasn't going to get it, and he left. And I was obviously the only black person. I said, obviously, usually am, the only black person on the panel. And when he left, I said, it's such a shame. I said, such a shame that he didn't quite make it, that he wasn't, because it'd be lovely to give. And they looked at me as though I was green and had come down from Mars. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, it's so hard for young black men. So it's so hard for them to get these sorts of jobs and to start their careers and do this. It's so difficult. And they looked at me as though I was an alien, honestly. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean it's hard? It's no harder for them than anyone else. I said, are you crazy?
Yeah.
Are you, sometimes I feel people aren't living in the world if they don't understand the challenges.
Well, because they don't, right?
I know.
The reason that I wanted to make this podcast was exactly that.
Yeah.
It is really hard, and people need to recognise it.
And that was a lesson for me, because I am my thinking, well, everybody knows it's hard for young black men. No, they don't.
Or they say, oh, because you're here, you're great evidence that it can be done, and it is easy for everyone. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here.
It's all right, we got one.
Yeah. Have you ever felt, you must have felt like the token.
Oh, a lot of the time.
Yeah. In fact, most of us, like when you said obviously before, you're like, you could have answered that, obviously. Because I think everyone I'd speak to would go, obviously. Yeah. Because there are so few.
Yeah, exactly.
It can be tough.
Okay.
Lonely?
Yeah, it can be. It can be. Sometimes it could be funny. I can remember sitting around an executive table once, and there was a discussion of diversity and inclusion and saying, they were talking about the numbers and about this executive team. And I said, well, thank God you got me. Because I'm the only person here who's giving you anything to write down on the piece of paper.
Yeah.
And they look at you and say, it's almost like, oh gosh, I'd even forgotten that you weren't white.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, they would do if you leave, because then the numbers look even worse.
But it's. I know, and they were just shocked when I said that. I said, well, yeah, you should be thanking me.
Yeah. I'm here, woof, woof,
exactly.
So given that, what role has sort of sponsorship, mentorship, leading to allyship, but maybe we'll separate the two, had for you in your career?
I think I've been fortunate to have a handful of people that have supported me and encouraged me. I would say, obviously, again, okay, none of them, all of them were white,
correct,
right? Because who else is there going to be, right? Yeah. But I've been fortunate in that. People who encouraged me, nothing to do with race, actually, just to be better, to do better, to learn more, to move along, and give me the opportunity. So I've been fortunate at that. One of the people that had a profound effect on me was the woman. I worked for a charity when I worked in America, called the Children's Defence Fund, and that was founded and led, certainly when I was there, by a lady called Marian Wright Edelman, and she was a great activist in the civil rights. She was a lawyer, activist in civil rights. She knew people like Bobby Kennedy and did all that kind of work.
Oh, wow.
And how she was the leader of this organisation I worked for, and her presence and her stories and her battle, I guess, her fight was also very impactful on me. The idea that you just got to keep at it. Yeah.
It's so amazing when you meet people like that, right? And you want to hardwire something out of their brain to get in your brain because it's something incredible for you. So, right, we got allyship, we got sponsorship as being key elements. We're here to talk about how we can encourage more leaders of colour on the way. You know, if we take it for as read that we believe some element of racism or prejudice exists in the workplace.
Oh gosh, yes.
You know,
absolutely.
I was going to say, do you think it exists? I mean, right, really? You know, why would we be talking about it? If that's the case, what do you think we need to do to try and fix it?
Gosh, that's what a
question.
It's
a million dollar question.
If I had the answer to that, you know, I think as we all know, I should not make assumptions, should I? But you and I certainly know it's a very complicated problem. It's a very complicated problem because I think that, as we've discussed already, there are a lot of people that don't even realise what's going on. Some people are in denial and don't want to know.
Yeah.
Some people do not understand and don't want to risk commercial success.
Yeah.
And on the other side of it, we've also got people of colour who, in some cases, are reticent to put themselves forward and to step in, or have been knocked back so many times that they become tired and worn out by trying to do this. So I think it's really, really difficult. Some of the things that have been tried, the sort of blind recruitment, to be honest with you, I have not seen a huge amount of success from that.
No.
Now, I'm not an HR professional, but in my working life, I haven't seen a huge amount of
And how can recruitment ever be?
Well, exactly.
You've got to see a candidate at some point.
Exactly. So I think it's a really difficult thing. I think people need to be educated, but more than educated, exposed.
When you say people, who do you mean?
I mean everybody. I mean at a societal level. So I was recently at an event, a social event. Personal friends of mine, social, nothing to do with work at all.
Yeah.
And this hasn't happened to me for quite a long time, okay, and I was the only non-white person there.
Right. How big was the event?
60, 80 people.
All right, okay.
And so people are still living their lives in these bubbles.
Yeah.
So, and people who are living like that are also people who are working in organisations and leading organisations and you know, and in services like healthcare or like the fire service or the police, or you know, I mean, these are all these people, and if that's your frame of reference in your society, how can you possibly ever have any understanding of people who are different from yourself?
Yeah.
Now, I know that sounds sort of ridiculously big, saying we have a societal education, but we do need to help people understand that different is to be celebrated, not criticised and not derided. Different doesn't automatically mean worse.
No.
Different can mean better.
And often means better. Diverse thinking,
Absolutely.
diverse perspectives. You all learn, everybody learns.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think is interesting to me in the health service particularly, and I was talking to a friend of mine this week about that actually, who was talking about diversity in the health service, and saying that when you look at the gross figures, let's take the NHS, the gross figures, it's a hugely diverse organisation.
Yes.
But most of them are at the bottom.
Yes.
So those raw numbers are not helpful.
No.
They're not helpful at all. And we have to understand what it is that's not enabling people to rise up. That's not, and what it is that means that people are not wanting to take advantage of those opportunities or being prevented from taking advantage of those opportunities. And it's very complicated.
Yeah, and if it exists in the NHS, the biggest employer in the world, and certainly in the country, one of the biggest employers in the world, right? But it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
I've met it. This is kind of my quest because I've seen it in football clubs, I've seen it in banks, I've seen it in insurance companies, I've seen it in the NHS, I've seen it in education, where there is plenty of representation at lower levels. But if you strip those out, there's hardly any at all.
Yeah.
As you get more senior, and therefore you or I and lots of people on this podcast become unicorns.
Yeah, I know.
But also, the reason people say it's okay. It's okay because I've seen Paula. It's okay because I've seen Oki. But that's nowhere near enough.
It's nowhere near enough. And I do go back to this sort of general sort of societal tolerance, understanding piece, because the other thing is once you get to be sitting around that table, it's absolutely useless if you feel isolated, if you feel incapacitated in terms of contribution, if you feel so different and so separate and so excluded that you're actually not making a difference, then that's not the purpose, right? You're not making the contribution that you're there to make.
Yeah, we talk about survive and thrive, and thrive. And can only get to that if the environment, the culture accepts you, because the reality is you can't change that overnight, right?
No.
So somehow we're going to create an environment whereby those people who are coming through feel like they belong.
Yeah.
Otherwise we might as well give up.
I do think that I've wavered on this over the years, but now I've come to the point where I think actually role models are important.
Yeah.
For a while I wasn't convinced, but now I think they are, because you have to see that somebody can do it.
Yeah.
And if somebody's done it, then you can do it.
Yeah.
If someone's reached that level or done that job or been appointed in that role, then why can't you do it?
Yeah.
So someone's made it through.
Yeah. That's why you're here, right? That's why we do Race to the Top. We do it because people need to be able to see it, be it. I completely believe and want to inspire. So on that note, if you were talking, I mean, you've got two
daughters, yeah.
So you're used to this. So what message do you give young people of colour starting in the foothills of their career that will mean that in 30 years' time I'm still not doing this podcast.
Gosh, wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would be amazing.
I think one of the important things, and this is not necessarily easy depending on what your personality is like, but one of the important things is to really know what your value is, and to be confident in your value, and therefore confident in your contribution. Confidence is huge.
Yeah.
That's one of the things when we go back to medical school, right?
Yeah.
All of these people were so confident.
Yeah.
They were talking probably BS, right?
Yeah.
But talking like they rule the world.
Confidence and self-belief, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't. I'm not interested in false confidence or sort of arrogance, but knowing your value, knowing what you can do, what you're worth, what you can do, what you can contribute, deriving confidence from that, deriving some determination from that, I think is really important, because you're going to need that.
And the reality is that's the same for people of colour or people from low social demographic, because there's huge crossover between the two.
Huge.
Right?
I agree.
A friend of mine said,
I agree.
She was white, and she was like, when I met
Yeah.
other white people who've been to private school, I felt like a fish out of water.
It's true.
Because of this confidence and the self-belief.
The other part of that, though, also is accent.
Yes.
I remember when I was a child, accent was massively important. And, obviously I'm ancient now, but on television, you never heard anyone speak that wasn't speaking a very plummy Queen's English. Yeah. And accents still now can be a problem.
Yes.
And that's a different flavour of what we've been talking about here.
Yeah.
It's a different reason for people to be prejudiced.
Yeah, absolutely. Although there's this weird, I'm from deepest, darkest Berkshire, but lots of the young white boys now speak like they're from South London, where I came from.
I know.
Which is
kind
of bizarre.
And, and they're fashion accents, but, there's not... I suppose it depends what it is, but, having grown up in Hackney...
Yeah.
You can have quite a broad Cockney accent. Yeah. That can be tricky to navigate if you want to be...
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I think, it's a whole other podcast, right, on accents and their impact on people's perception. You know, I always feel like as we get towards the end of this podcast that we've been like, yeah, this needs to be better, this needs to be better. So I always like to finish on reasons to be hopeful, right? Yeah. So when you stop and think about it, given everything we've talked about, give us some reason to be hopeful. What should we be hopeful for?
Well, I think the first thing probably is we're so hungry for progress. We're so hungry for this wretched issue to be resolved and buried once more. It's sometimes easy to forget how far we have actually come. And, again, sort of thinking back to my childhood and my parents and so on, we have come a long way. So if we've made that much progress, we can make more.
Yes.
I think that's a reason to be hopeful. I think the other reason to be hopeful, quite frankly, is that one of the issues that helps break down such barriers are times of crisis. So I think we saw some of that, a bit to and fro within COVID, but certainly when economy demands, all of a sudden it's okay. Yeah. You know, let's talk Windrush, right? Yeah. You know, and so I think that we in difficult economic circumstances, we need to take advantage of that. Yeah. And forge through and grab those roles and grab those opportunities, and then don't let them go, and show people how good we are and the contribution that we can make. But also, I suppose, in a sort of fairy tale way, I just think that human beings will sort this. Yeah. I just think we will.
Before the AI does.
Well, yeah, that's a whole different set of podcasts. But AI is interesting, right? Because depending on how you program it, if you program it in an agnostic way, it will be agnostic. Yeah. So that could be an advantage at some point.
Or
it could be very detrimental.
It could be the detrimental. But you're right. That's maybe for a part 2 that we'll do another time.
Could be very biased and detrimental.
And lastly, you know, you've got 2 young daughters. Do you feel like it's been different for them? Very. Good.
I think, well, not always in a good way.
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry. Well, no, I think it's been different for them. Now, I think the world is more mixed and more open, and they do have more of a choice about where they live and what they do. I think, as I said earlier, they didn't have the joy of the growing up that I had. Yeah. You know, I think they had a very different school experience and early childhood experience, and I regret that. Okay, I regret that because I was not having not been aware of it myself. I wasn't able then to say, "Oh gosh,
I want to give them something that's different to that." Yeah. I know. You shouldn't beat yourself up about it. Shouldn't, because I'm sure they're doing great. You know,
and they're great girls. They're great girls. You know what's interesting about them is they look very different. Right. So one of them is darker than I am, and the other one you wouldn't know she wasn't white.
Oh wow!
And that's really interesting. And I was, you know, their experiences of living in the world, same mother, are very different. Yeah. And until those experiences are not different, then we haven't won.
Oh, what a poetic way to finish! What an absolutely poetic way to finish. Because you're 100% right. Yeah. Look, Paula, it's been amazing spending time with you again after all of these years.
I know, it's lovely to see you again.
And you. It's, I'm really pleased that you came on. It's been insightful as always. So I'd like to thank you, Dr. Paula, for sharing your stories.
Hard work getting that, you
know. We know. You've said, and look, I've seen it, you know. So thank you for spending the time with us. Telling us your story and hopefully inspiring another generation of doctors. It would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Ake.
Brilliant. Thanks.